Now we are in section 2, describe capabilities of Microsoft Azure Active Directory, part of Microsoft Entra, which has 4 modules. We will explore service and identity type of Azure Active Directory, explore authentication capabilities of Azure Active Directory, explore access management capabilities of Azure Active Directory, and explore describe identity protection governance capabilities of Azure Active Directory. So let's start with module 1, describe Azure AD and describe identity type of Azure AD supports. Identity and access management remain the biggest setup challenges in today's multi-cloud platform and digital landscape. How can you do to safely, securely, and conveniently for your customer and employees? You should consider Microsoft Entra. Digital transformation and rapid cloud adoption has changed the way we work, is freed organization from traditional on-premise services and unshackled workers from their desks. However, today's connected landscape poses new challenges when it comes to identity and access management, which include rapidly expanding attack surfaces due to a growing number of the diverse access points. To increase value and growing sophistications of attack, overlapping of identity and access tools, technologies, etc. In response to these challenges, Microsoft has extended their portfolio of identity and access technologies and put them under the single umbrella and portal. That portal is Microsoft Entra. Microsoft Entra is the new name from the family of identity and access technologies, now brought into one place and under one portal. Entra goes behind the traditional identity and access management. It is Microsoft's vision for the future of identity and access. As well as Azure AD, the Entra portal includes permission management, utilizing cloud infrastructure, entitlement management, CIEM, and Verify ID for decentralized identity management. Microsoft Entra will verify all types of identity and secure, manage, govern their access to any resources. New Microsoft Entra product will protect access to any app or resources for any users, secure and verify every identity across hybrid or multi-cloud environment, discover and govern permission in multi-cloud environment, simplifying the user experience with real-time intelligence access decision. Azure Active Directory is a Microsoft Cloud-based identity and access management service. Organizations use Azure AD to enable their employees, guests, and others to sign in and get access to resources they need, including internal resources such as apps on your corporate network or internet, and cloud apps developed by your own organizations. And also too, external services such as Microsoft Office 365 and Azure Portal, and many SaaS applications used by your organizations. There are 4 identity types with Azure Active Directory. That's users, service principals, managed identity, and devices. User identity are representation of an entity that is managed by Azure AD. Both employees and guests are represented as users. Guest is external out of the company, like a business partner or vendor, which collaborating with your employees. Feature with an external identity is that includes capabilities to add guest users, enabling organization to securely share application and services with guest users from other organizations. Service principal. An identity for application and enables feature like authentication and authorization of the application resources that are secured by Azure AD tenant. An application must first be registered with Azure AD to enable identity and access integration. Once registered, service principal is created in each Azure AD tenant where the application is used to enable authentication and authorization in resource access. Managed identity. Managed identity removed the overhead of the manually managing credentials, secrets, passwords, and keys with an application's inside code. Instead, this information is automatically managed with Azure Active Directory when connected to the resources that supports Azure Active Directory authentication. Managed identity can be used to request and receive Azure AD tokens without any requirements to govern credentials, secret keys, passwords. Generally, managed identity is a special type of the service principal that's automatically managed in Azure AD. Managed identity comes in two varieties. User assigned, which can be shared by multiple resources and has life cycle independent of these resources. For example, you could assign this user assigned ID to many virtual machines. And the system assigned, which is tied to life cycle of a specific service or resources and cannot be shared. There are several benefits using managed identities, which include many Azure services that support Azure ID authentication can use managed identities to authenticate another Azure services, for example, accessing Azure Key Vault. For example, application developers who want to build application using an Azure resources, such as VM, that accesses any Azure resources that supports Azure ID authentication without having managed credentials. Managed identities can be used without any extra cost. And here is the one last identity type, device identity. It can be Azure AD registered device, provide users with support, bring your own device, and can be Azure AD joined device. That device joined to Azure through the organization's account, which is then used to sign to this device. And also can be hybrid Azure AD joined device. This device is domain joined to Azure and on-premise Active Directory. External identities. Azure Active Directory external identities focuses less on users' relationship to your organizations and more on how the users want to sign in to your apps and resources. Within this framework, Azure Active Directory supports a variety of scenarios. Business-to-business collaboration scenarios allows you to invite external users into your own tenant as guest users that you can assign permission to for authorization, while letting them use their existing credentials for authentication. Users sign in to shared resources using the simple invitation and redemption process with their work, school, or other email account. You can also use Azure Active Directory Entitlement Management to configure policies that manage access for external users. And now, with ability of the self-service sign-up user flow, you can allow external users to sign up for application themselves. The experience can be customized to allowing sign-up with work, school, or social identities such as Google, Facebook, etc. You can also collect information about user sign-in process. Azure Active Directory Business to Business is a service that enables you to securely collaborate with external partners. Your partner users are invited as guest user. You remain control what they has access to and how long. Azure Business to Consumer Access Management. Azure B2C is the Customer Identity Access Management CIAM solution. B2C allows external users to sign in with their preferred social, enterprise, or local account identities to get single sign-on to your applications. Azure AD B2C supports millions of users and billions of authentications per day. It takes care of the scaling, safety, authentication platform, monitoring, and automatically handling threats like denial of services, password spay, or brute forces attack, etc. With Azure AD B2C, external users are managed in the Azure AD B2C directly, separately from the organization's employees and partners directory. SSO to customer-owned apps with Azure B2C tenant is also supported. Azure B2C is an authentication solution that you can customize with your brand, so that the brands with your web and mobile applications. The concept of the hybrid identities. Organizations can utilize either hybrid or cloud-only identity approach. The hybrid module, on the other hand, creates identities in Windows Active Directory or another identity provider. After that, it's synced with Azure AD. In the cloud-only authentication architecture, identities are created in Azure AD only. Furthermore, users who access both on-premises and cloud apps are handled as a hybrid user on premise Active Directory. All changes to user accounts, groups, and the contacts in your on-premises Active Directory are synchronized to Azure AD. However, authentication may be done in a variety of the ways. Firstly, Azure AD using the managed authentication. Secondly, Azure AD directing client requesting authentication to another identity provider using federated authentication. Authentication methods. 3 authentication methods are here. Firstly, password hash synchronization. The simplest way to enable authentication for on-premise directory object in Azure AD. That user have the same username and password that are used on-premise without any other infrastructure required. Secondly, pass-through authentication provides simple password validation for Azure AD authentication services. By using software agent, this can run on one or more on-premises servers. The servers validate the user directly with an on-premise Active Directory, which ensures that the password validation doesn't happen in a cloud. Lastly, federated authentication. Azure AD has authentication process to separate trusted authentication systems, such as on-premise Active Directory federation services, to validate users' password. Okay, let's now move to Module 2. Explore authentication capabilities in Azure Active Directory. In this module, we will go to describe authentication method of Azure Active Directory, describe multi-factor authentication in Azure Active Directory, and describe password protection and management capabilities of Azure Active Directory. Multi-factor authentication. Azure Active Directory multi-factor authentication works by requiring something you know, typically a password or PIN, and something you have, such as some trusted device that's not easy to duplicate, like phone or the hardware token, hardware key, or something you are, biometrics like the fingerprint, face scan, etc. Multi-factor authentication verification prompts are configured to be part of Azure signing event. Azure AD automatically requests and processes multi-factor authentication without you making any changes to your applications or services. When users sign in, they receive multi-factor authentication prompt and can choose from one of the additional verification forms that they are registered. An administrator can require a certain verification method, or user can access my account to edit or add verification methods. There are the several extra forms of verification that can be used with Azure Active Directory multi-factor authentication, like Microsoft Authenticator app, SMS, voice call, out hardware token, etc., etc. Security default and Multi-factor authentication. Security defaults are the set of the basic security mechanism recommended by Microsoft. When enabled, this recommendation will be automatically enforced in your organization. The goal is to ensure that all organizations have a basic level of security enabled at no extra cost. These defaults enable some of the most common security features and controls, including enforcing Azure Active Directory multi-factor authentication, registration for all users, forcing administrators to use multi-factor authentication, requiring all users to complete multi-factor authentication when needed. Security defaults are a great option for organizations that want to increase their security posture but don't know where to start, or for organizations using the free tier of Azure AD licensing. Security defaults may not be appropriate for organizations with Azure AD premium licenses or more complex security requirements. Self-service password reset. One of the great servicing in Azure AD is self-service password reset. This feature enables users to reset the password in any time or unblock their blocked password from some reason. This is a fantastic feature which helps help desk support. User can reset or change password using self-service password reset portal. They must first have registered their desired authentication method. When a user access to self-service password reset portal, the Azure platform consider some of the following factors. How should the page be localized? Is their user account valid? What organizations those users belong to? Where is the user's password managed? And is the user licensed to use this feature? When the users select cannot access my account link for application or page, or goes to direct to aka.msbr, after portal is displayed in the required language, user is prompted to enter a user ID, and Azure AD verifies that user is able to use SSRP by doing some checks. First, check that the user has SSRP enabled and is assigned Azure ID licensing to them. Then checks the user has right authentication method defined on their account in accordance with administrator policy. And finally checks to see if the user's password is managed on-premise, such as if the Azure Active Directory tenant is using federated pass-through authentication or password hash synchronization. If that one federated user, RBAC is configured and the user password is managed on the premise, user is allowed to proceed to and authenticate their password. Self-service password reset I will show you directly in a portal later. Password protection and management capability in Azure AD. When it comes to securing access to critical business resources and data, passwords remain the most preferred form of authentication by organizations across the globe. However, people often use easy-to-remember passwords with common terms or names, and they use the same password across multiple accounts. Azure AD Password Protections is a feature that aims to help organizations mitigate the risk of weak and commonly used passwords. Basically, it acts as a password filter that rejects frequently used, easily hackable passwords. It can be extended to on-premise AD as well as by installing an agent in domain controller and proxy service across your internal network. Azure AD Password Protection is enabled by default for all users. However, only approximately 1,000 words are included in the banned lists. To add your own lists of the words, you need to enable and enforce custom list options, protecting against password spray attacks. Azure AD Password Protection helps you defend password spray attacks. So most password spray attacks submit a few of the known weakest passwords against each account in an enterprise. These techniques allow the attacker to quickly search for an easily compromised account that avoid potential thresholds. Azure AD password protection efficiently blocks all known weak passwords likely to be used in password spray attacks. This protection is based on the real-world security telemetry data from Azure AD, which is used to build global banded password lists. Hybrid security. For hybrid security, admins can integrate Azure AD password protection with an on-premise Active Directory environment. A component installed on on-premise environment receives the global banned password list and custom password protection policy from Azure AD. Domain controllers then use them to process password change events. This hybrid approach makes sure that every user changes their password, Azure AD password protection is applied.
Now it's time for the lab demo. In this demo, first I will explore the users in Azure Active Directory. I have already created a user in my tenant called course tenant, and after goes through the user setting, I will enable self-service password reset for particular users group. I do not going to show you how to create users. I assume you already know that. We are on Active Directory Blade in Portal now. Under the Manage section, let's open the User tab and a new Blade with all users in this tenant will open. If I scroll down, I'm able to find the test user. On that Blade, I can find almost all the information related to that user. If I click on the Edit Properties tab, we will see the user information. As you can see that the user is a security manager and works in the sales department. There are also user mobile phone that can be used for multi-factor authentication if the user does not decide to use another number. Information about location is very important. If you do not specify location for the user, you will not be able to assign the necessary license to the user. This is the most common error that can prevent the grant of license for a user. I will add the US location for our test 900 user. Our user is a member of our organization and has access to the company's Microsoft 365 portal. But let's check if our user can use Office 365 and Outlook. I will open a new in private window in Microsoft Edge Explorer and log into the Microsoft 365 portal. As you can see, the user can access the 365 portal but does not have Office 365. So that means that the user do not have assigned appropriate license for use Office 365. Let's turn back in Azure portal in our tenant on the test 900 user blade. But before we assign a license to user, let's check if this user has assigned the appropriate rules. This user is a new employee as security manager in sales department and needs security administrator permissions. After clicking on assigned rule, you can see that users do not have assigned appropriate rule. I will assign security administrator role to the user. By clicking on plus add assignment, I am able to select appropriate rule for our user. In this case, I will use the search options to find the security admin rule and select them. After clicking next, I am on setting tab, where I have several options. In this way, I can assign the rule to the user so that is immediately active, or the user is eligible to activate the rule only when user needs it. Also, eligible and active can be permanent or limited to the certain period of the time. For now, I will assign the user and active rule. I will explain you eligible options when we will do lab demo for privileged identity management later. When you're assigning the active user, you must also enter the justification. I will just enter OK, that's enough for this demo. After user has assigned a rule, go to the license tab. Let's see if the user has the appropriate license. As you can see, our user does not have any license, and I'm going to assign him a license from my package of licenses that I have. I have Microsoft 365 E5 license package, and I will assign one license for our user. You can also turn off the license for some of the services if you not need for this user. After a short time, we will see that the license appears with 57 enabled services. That's excellent. Let's check again our test 900 user by logging him into 365 portal again. This time you can see that the user has access to Office 365 as well Outlook, which was our goal. Why did I spend all this time on the user license for, I don't know, Office 365? Generally, licensing is very important. For the user to be capable for self-service password reset, your Azure Active Directory tenant must have the last Premium 1 AD license. Otherwise, you will not be able to roll user for self-service password reset. Also, other very useful security services and options will not be available to you without an AD Premium 1 or AD Premium 2 licenses. Now we are on the portal again and has open AD Blade. We can make sure that the Azure Active Directory has Premium 2 license in our case. Since we have user and appropriate licenses, let's set up self-service password reset. Let's scroll down in AD Blade and we have the password reset tab. As you can see, self-service password reset is not enabled by default. You can enable self-service password reset with all users or with a group of users. But before we do that, let's go back to our user to check the group membership. I have already added our user to the group I created and called it SSPR group. So self-service password reset will be enabled for the group SSPR. Our user is a member of that group. Let's go back to the password reset blade. I will enable SSPR for the selected SSPR group. As you can see, SSPR is enabled for the group, and don't forget to click Save. On the left side you will find the Registration tab. As you can see, registration for SSPR is enabled for all users by default, and I will not change anything here. The next tab is Notification. Notification for password reset is already enabled, and I will not change anything there. Every time the user resets his password, he will be notified by email. That was the one of the reason we need the test 900 user to have access to Office 365 and Outlook. The next tab we need is Authentication method. The new blade is open, and here we can adjust the number of authentication method for self-service password reset. By default is one authentication method. I will stick to one on this demo. Here are some available methods. If you decide to include the questions method, for example, you need to set how many questions the user can register and how many they must answer during the authentication process. I will stay with the two methods, email and mobile phone. And that's it. I think we are done with this setup, and let's try self-service password rest. Now let's open new in private window in a browser for test 900 user. And the service asks me for authentication. Instead of entering password, I will click on the Forget My Password link. On the next screen, I need to configure user already entered email address and prove that I'm not a robot. By clicking on Next, new window will open as an additional form of authentication, where the user is asked to enter complete phone number that ends in 27. This is exactly the phone numbers that user has in his user profile. After entering phone number, press Text to receive the text message with verification code to the specified phone number. After successfully receiving the verification code, enter the code and click the Next. A new window opens where we can enter a new password and confirm it again. Once you're done, click the Finish. We got confirmation that our password has been changed. Let's try to use a new password. I will enter new password for test 900 user to access Office 365. As you can see, new password is worked perfectly. If we go to Outlook, we will also see message information, actually message informing the user that the user password has been successfully changed. This concludes this lab demo. See you in the next one.
Now we will move to Module 3, explore the access management capabilities of Azure Active Directory. We will describe conditional access and its benefits and describe Azure Active Directory rules and role-based access control. Conditional access is the tool used by Azure Active Directory to bring seamless together to make the decision and enforce organization policies. Conditional access is the heart of the new identity-driven control plane. Conditional access enforce policies. If a user wants to access a resource, then they must complete an action. For example, payroll manager wants to access payroll application and is required to perform multi-factor authentication to access it. By using control access policy, you can apply right access control when needed to keep your organization secure. And conditional access policy are enforced after the first factor authentication has been completed. Users and groups can be enabled for multi-factor authentication to prompt from additional verification during the signing event. Security defaults are available for all Active Directory tenants to quickly enable use of the Microsoft Authenticator app for all users, for example. Common signals that conditional access can take into account when making a policy decision includes the user or group membership. Policy can be targeted to the specific user and groups, giving administrator fine-grained control over access. Also, IP location information. Organization can create trusted IP address range that can be used when making policy decisions. For devices, user with devices of specific platforms or market with specific state can be used when enforcing control access policies. Also for application, user attempting access specific application can trigger different control access policy. For real-time and calculated risk detection, integration with Azure Active Directory Identity Protection allows the control access policy to be identify risk signing behavior. Policies can then force users to perform password changes or multi-factor authentication to reduce their risk. or can block them from access until an administrator takes manually action to unblock. Microsoft Cloud App Security enables user application access and session to be controlled in real time, increasing visibility and control over access performed with the cloud environment.
In previous lesson we have to learn about conditional access, this great feature in Azure Active Directory. But now it's time for the lab. I want to show you in lab activity how you can enable conditional access to protect your corporate resources. If you remember our test user from previous lab, this test user working in sales department as security administrator. Sales department has a web app which hosting very sensitive data about sales campaign, and a basic authentication process for web app is already enabled and is already used. But sales department want to additional authentication process to protect this sensitive data. So it's the best way to protect this application is to use conditional access, which will require user to perform multi-factor authentication when accessing this sensitive data. As you can see, sales web app already perform basic authentication process. But we're going to set up conditional access. So that means that for user which require access to this web app needs to be performed multi-factor authentication to access. From Active Directory Blade, let's scroll down and select Security tab. Under Protect Group, you will find Conditional Access tab. Conditional Blade will be open and we're going to select Create New Policy. I will give the simple name for our new policy, Web Access. Clicking on the assignment user type, you can choose who will be affected by this policy. As you can see, I selected the SSPR group to be affected with this policy. Our test user is a member of this group. Next step asks you to decide what you're going to protect. I'm going to protect our web app. We'll use the search to find sales plain app. But before continue, let me show you one additional options in Assignment User tab. You can also assign the policy by selecting directory rules. In our case, our user is a security administrator. Let's find them. Take a look, now we have two assignments for same policy. One is by directory rule and second is by the user and groups. But be careful with the directory rules. Maybe you have more than one people which has these rules in your company, so maybe you don't want to other security administrator be affected with this policy. So that's the just case I want to show you how this looks like. And I will lab this. Under grant control, you can grant or deny access. In our case, we will grant access, but under condition that multi-factor authentication is required. In simple words, that means when user will access the sales app, will be asked for additional authentication process. Here are the three options for enabling policy. It's report only, on and off. Report only is a great option when you just starting deploy some policy and you want to see how this policy has effect on your user. In our case, I will set up on, and that means this policy will be active right now. We are finished and just click Create to create the policy. If we will turn back in Policy tab, we will see that our policy is successfully created. Now let's test our conditional access policy. I will open a web app Blade, and from web app Blade I can browse using in private Internet Explorer. As you can see, app asks me for basic authentication process for my username and password. When I insert my credentials, web app asks me for additional authentication method using my cell phone. I click Send Me Message on my cell phone and wait for security code. Once when I insert my security code, which I receive via text message, I can access to cell's web app, performing multi-factor authentication in exactly how conditional access policy required. That's all for this lab. See you in next one.
In Azure Active Directory, if one of your users need permission to manage Azure Active Directory resources, you must assign them to the rule that provides permissions they need. If you are new to Azure, you may find it's a little challenging to understand all of these different rules in Azure. Actually, we have Azure rules and Azure Active Directory rules. Azure Active Directory rules are used to manage Azure Active Directory resources in a directory, such as create or edit users, assign administrator role to other, reset user password, manage user's license, etc. Some of the Azure Active Directory rules are global administrator, user administrator, billing administrator, etc. What's the differences between Azure rule and Azure Active Directory rule? At the high level, Azure rule controls permission to manage Azure resources, while Azure Active Directory rules control permission to manage Azure Active Directory resources. Both kind rules supports manage access to Azure resources, supports custom rules, but scope in Azure rule can be specified at the multiple level. For example, on management groups, subscriptions, resource group, resources, etc. Until scope for Azure Active Directory rules is at the tenant level. For Azure rule information can be accessed in Azure Portal, Azure CLI, Azure PowerShell, Azure Resource Management Templates, and REST API. But for Azure Active Directory rule information can be accessed in Azure Portal, Microsoft 365 Admin Center, Microsoft Graph, Azure Active Directory PowerShell, etc. Rule-based access control. In Azure, resource access is controlled via a mechanism called rule-based access control, which allows you to assign different permission to users and more according to their exact needs. Generally, each Azure subscription is associated with one Azure Active Directory. User groups and applications in that directory can manage resources in the Azure subscription. For example, grant access by assigning appropriate rule-based access control rule to user groups and applications. At a certain scope, it's a very, very important task. The scope of the rule assigned can be subscription, resource group, or single resources. Rule-based access control includes the many built-in rules, which you can assign to different scopes, and allows you to create your own custom rules to manage resources in Azure Active Directory, such as user groups and domains. Several Azure AD administrator rule also exists. To make it convenient with managed identity access and Microsoft 365 services, Azure Active Directory has added some service-specific built-in rules, each which grants administrator access to the Microsoft 365 services. This means that Azure AD built-in rules differ in where they can be used. There are three broad categories. Azure AD-specific rules. Those rules grant the permission to manage resource within Azure Active Directory only. For example, user administrator, application administrator, group administrator, all grants permission to manage resources that lives in Azure Active Directory. Service-specific rule for major Microsoft 365 services, Azure Active Directory includes built-in service-specific rules that grants permission to manage features within the services. For example, Azure Active Directory includes built-in rules for Exchange Administrator, Intune Administrator, SharePoint Administrator, Teams Administrator rules, etc. that can manage feature with their respective services. Cross-services rules, there are some rules with Azure Active Directory that span services. For example, Azure Active Directory has a security-related rules like Security Administrator that grants access across multiple security services within Microsoft 365. Similarly, the Compliance Administrator rule. You can manage compliance-related setting in Microsoft Purview, Compliance Portal, Exchange, etc. Now, we are on Module 4. Describe identity protection and governance capabilities of Azure Active Directory. In this module, we will describe the identity governance capabilities of Azure Active Directory. We will describe benefits of privileged identity management and describe capabilities of Azure Identity Protection. Identity governance in Azure Active Directory. What is the Azure Active Directory Identity Governance? Azure Active Directory Identity Governance enables you to balance your organization's needs for security and employee productivity with the right process and visibility. It provides you with capability to ensure that the right people have the right access to right resources. Azure AD and Enterprise Mobility plus security features allows you to mitigate access risk by protecting, monitoring, and auditing access to the critical access, while ensuring employee and business partner productivity in the same time. Identity governance gives the organization ability to complete tasks across employee business partners and vendors, and across services and applications both on-premise and also in the cloud. Specifically, it is intended to help organizations address some of the key questions: which users should have access to which resources, what are those users going to with that access, are there effective organizational control for managing access, and can auditors verify the controls are working? Azure AD Identity Governance gives the organization ability to do some of the tasks like governed identity lifecycle, govern access lifecycle, secure privilege access for administrator lifecycle, etc., etc. Managing user identity lifecycle is at the heart of the identity governance when planning identity lifecycle manager for employees. For example, many organizations may join, move, and leave process, or when an individuals first join an organization. New digital identity is created if one isn't already available for these individuals. When an individuals move between organizational boundaries, more access authorization may need to be added or removed to this identity. When an individual leaves, access may need to be removed, and the identity may not longer be required, other than for audit purpose. In general, managing the life cycle of an identity is about updating the access that users need, whether through the integration with an human resources system or through the user provisioning applications. Entitlement management. Enterprise organization facing challenge when managing employee access to resources, while user may not know what access they should have, and even if they do, they may have difficulty to locating and reach individuals to approve their access. Or once users find and receive access to resources, they may hold on to access longer than is required for the business purpose. Those problems are for users who need access to another organization, such as external users who are from supply chain organization or other business partners. For example, Azure Active Directory entitlement management can help organization ensure that everyone has access to the correct directories and all user access is managed consistently. When new users or external users join your site, quickly assigning the access to Azure solution is a must. Entitlement management helps companies to delegate non-administrator ability to create access packages and provide users from connected organization ability to request those access. What's then access review? Once you integrate your organizational resources with Azure Active Directory, such as user application and groups, they can be managed and reviewed. Once identity is deployed, proper governance using access review is necessary for secure solution. Azure Active Directory identity governance and enables you to balance your organization's needs for security and employee productivity with right process and visibility. It provides you with the capability to ensure that the right people have the right access to right resources. Those and related Active Directory and Enterprise Mobile Plus security features allows you to mitigate access risk by protecting, monitoring, and auditing access to the critical access while ensuring employee and business partner productivity. If you want to add terms of use for your customer and employee, which access in Azure portal, you can do that in a very simple way. You should use PDF format to present content. PDF file can be any content such as existing document allowing you to collect user agreements during the user sign-in process, for example. Privileged identity management. Privileged identity management provides time-based and accrual-based rule activation to mitigate the risk of excessive, unnecessary, or misused access permission on resources that you care about. Key features of privileged identity management includes provide just-in-time privileged access to Azure Active Directory and Azure resources, assign time-bound access to these resources using the start and end days, required approval to activate privilege rules, and force multi-factor authentication to activate any rules. Use also justification to understand why user is active. Get notification that privileged user is activated. Conduct access preview to ensure that user still needs the rules, and also download history for internal and external audit. PIM reduced the chance of malicious actor getting access by minimizing the number of the people who have access to secure information and resources. By time limiting authorized user, it reduced the risk of an authorized user inadvertently affecting sensitive resources. PIM also provides oversight what users are doing with their administrator privileges.
In previous lesson we learned about privileged identity management. Now is lab time to show you how it's work in real environment. You can remember our test user from previous lab. Let's remember test user working in sales department as a security administrator. He is enrolled as a security administrator with the permanent active role. Sales department want to keep this user with the security administrator role. But sales department want to be sure that this rule is used only when it's necessary and needs to go through the approval process. To accomplish these requirements, you should use privileged identity management in Azure Active Directory. So we will assign security administrator role to test user as eligible. Anytime when test user want to use this rule, he need to activate rule and ask for approval. So let's start from the test user setting. As you can see, user has assigned the security administrator role. I'm simply going to remove this rule for now. Let's back to Active Directory blade. If I scroll down, I will find Identity Governance tab and the new Identity Governance blade will be opened. In the Privileged Identity Management section, I will click on Active Directory rule, where I can find all tools I need. But I want to use totally new environment to finish my task. That's the Microsoft Entra. Microsoft Entra is a new name for the family of identity and access technology, now brought into one place and under one portal. Entra goes behind traditional identity and access management. It's a Microsoft vision for the future of identity and access. If we scroll down, we will find Identity Governance, and under this section we will find Privileged Identity Management tab. That opens new blade where we will set up a privileged identity for our test user. Let's click on AD rules and goes to an assignment. On this blade we have option to add new assignment. In the Add Assignment blade, let's find the Security Administrator role. After selecting rule, I will select member for assignment. In our case, that's our test user. Clicking on the next, we will go to the settings section. In assignment type, I will keep eligible and just click assign. Now you can see that test user has eligible assignment. But before finish with this, let's go to the setting of security administrator role to make some adjustment. Because the sales department require activation approval for this rule, I need to make this adjustment here. In the edit rule setting, you can do all adjustment you need for this account. You can see that maximum duration upon one activation can be only 8 hours. You can also change this if you need. Because activation approval is required, I need to check require to activate. And also I need to select who is approver. I will select global admin account for approver. In other two sections, assignment and notification, I don't going to change nothing. Just will click update. Now we finish with setup. Let's open test user Outlook to see what kind of the message user receive. As you can see, message say that user is assigned to security administrator role. And user now can click on the link to activate your role. Azure portal with new blade are opened and user can go to the activate rule. When user click on activate, validation is required, and here is the link which user needs to follow to authenticate yourself. And of course, user is asked for multi-factor authentication using his phone number and the security code. Once user authenticated, he can write justification and click the activation tab. As you can see in the notification details title, user request pending for approval. We'll first open Outlook of global administrator user. Last email message announced that test user is assigned to security administrator role. It needs to be approved or denied. When approvers click on Approve or Deny Request, new blade in Azure Active Directory are opened. In this blade, approver can find the request and approve or deny. During approval process, approver needs to write justification. I write just OK, that's enough for me. Once test user approved, he can check this approval and active and eligible assignment on his account on Active Directory. As you can see, start and end time, user can see how many hours he has to finish his job during these activations. Let's open Test User Outlook to check email messages. As you can see in last message, test user can see that his request for security administrator role has been approved. That's all in this lab. See you in next one.
Azure Identity Protection. Identity protection is a tool that allows organizations to accomplish three key tasks. Automate detection and remediation of identity-based risk, investigate risk using data in the portal, and export risk detection data to third-party utilities for future analysis. The signals generated by the and fit to identity protection can be future fit into tools like conditional access to make access decision, or feedback to security information, and event management tools for future investigation based on your organization enforced policy. Currently, Azure Directory detects several types of risk detections. Users with leaked credentials, when cyber criminals compromise a valid password of a legitimate user, they often share those credentials. Signing from anonymous IP address, this risk detection type identifies users who has successfully signed in from an IP address that has been identified as an anonymous proxy IP address, etc. Impossible travel to a typical location. This risk detection type identifies two sign-ins originating from geographically distant location, where at last one of the location may also be atypical for user. There is also sign-ins from infected devices. This risk detection type identifies sign-ins from devices infected with the malware, but are known to actively communicate with bot server. Signing from unfamiliar location. This consider past sign-in location like IP address, latitude, longitude, and autonomous zones to determine new unfamiliar location for this user. And also sign in from IP addresses with suspicious activities. Identity protection provides organizations with three reports that they can be used to investigate and identify risk in their environment. Those reports are the risky user, risky sign-in, and risk detection. Investigation of events is key to understanding, identifying any weak points in your security strategies. This concludes the second section. Before we move to the third section, let's first do a quick review of some of the details we have learned. Just a few to stay in shape. If your organization is launching a new app for your customer, customers will use sign-in screen that is customized by organization's brand identity. Azure AD B2C is an authentication solution for customers that you can customize your brand identity. If your organization has completed full migrations to the cloud and has purchased devices for all its employees, all employees sign in this device to the organizational account configured in Azure AD, you should set up these devices as Azure AD joined. An Azure AD joined device is device joined to the Azure through the organizational account, which is then used to sign in into device. Azure AD joined device are generally owned by organizations. If your developers want to set up application to connect Azure resources that supports Azure AD authentication, without having managed any credentials and without incurring any extra cost, you should use Managed Identity. Managed Identity are the type of the service principals that automatically manage in Azure AD and eliminate the needs for developers to manage any credentials. If your security team wants to improve identity security with their organizations, and you want to provide the greatest protection to user, you should use multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication dramatically improves the security of an identity. Additionally, form of authentication can be used with Azure multi-factor authentication. That's Microsoft Authenticator app, SMS voice call, FIDO2, and Windows Hello for Business. If you've been asked to find a way to reduce IT costs without compromising security, you should consider implementing self-service password reset. Self-service password reset allows users to change or reset their password, terribly reducing costs that provide for administrator and help desk personnel. If your organization plans to implement conditional access, you should create policy that enforce organization's rules. Conditional access is implemented by using the policy that enforce organizational rules. Sign-in risk is a signal used by the conditional access policy to decide whether to grant or deny access. Sign-in risk is real-time calculation that a given authentication request isn't authorized by the identity owner. If you have been asked to review Azure AD rules assigned to the user to improve organizational security, you should replace global admin rule with specific Azure AD rules by following the least privileged security module and assigning specific admin rules such as billing administrator or user administrator to more users instead of global administrator rule for this user. If your organization has implemented important changes in their customer-facing applications, and you want to ensure that any user who wishes to access this application agrees to legal disclaimer, you should implement Azure AD Terms of Use. Presents information to user before they are access data and can be configured required user to a set of terms of use. If your organization has recently conducted security audit and found that for people who left still active in assigning global admin rule, you should use a privileged identity management solution to prevent a similar security lapse happening in the future. Privileged identity management mitigates the risk of excessive, unnecessary, or misused access permissions. If your IT organizations recently discovered that several user accounts in the finance department have been compromised, identity protection is a solution to reduce the impact of the compromised user accounts. Identity protection is the tool that allows organizations to utilize security signals to identify potential threats.